Hello and welcome to Chess Lovers channel. Today we have come to my 24th choice of best classical middle game books. And the book I'm holding in my hand is written by the first official world champion Wilhelm Steinitz, and his most famous book is Modern Chess Instructor. And this edition is in two parts. I have another edition written in descriptive notation, but only the first part is contained in this book. I would rather recommend this one. It's written in algebraic notation and it contains two parts, because the second part is very much worth reading. Wilhelm Steinitz was the first official world champion 1886 by beating the great talent Johannes Zukertort. Steinitz was born in Prague 14th of May 1836, and 20 years later he moved to Vienna because he wanted to work as a chess journalist. But then he discovered that he was a very strong chess player. So he started to play chess and earn money in that way. And eventually he was called the Austrian Morphy, because Morphy was an active player in the 1850s. His most famous victory is when he beat Adolf Andersson 1866 by 8-6. It was a very exciting match, but Steinitz was the strongest player, and many people regarded him already then as the unofficial world champion, as Morphy then had quit chess. But he became world champion officially 1886, and after the match with Zukertort, he also played several world championship matches against Mikhail Chigorin. He actually met him twice, and he also beat Isidor Gunsberg. He finally lost to the second world champion Emanuel Lasker in 1894, and in the revenge match 1896 he lost as well. So these things you should know about Wilhelm Steinitz. He died 1900, 12th of August in New York. And before he moved to North America, he also lived in England. So he lived in many different places during his career. We will not go into detail about his life. I think this is some basic facts you should know about him. Now we turn to his ideas, his books and contributions in the chess world. He was a chess journalist, and his most famous contribution is International Chess Magazine. Here you can also see a picture of him. And this volume 1, is from 1885. As you can see, I have all his volumes and the last one ends 1891. And if you are interested in Steinitz seriously, you should try to pursue these books, because he had a golden pen. He was really skillful writing about chess. This was his great strength. He was more like a theoretical player than a practical. And Lasker also said those famous words when Steinitz beat Sukertot, that the great thinker has beaten the great talent, or maybe the great player. So we should have this in mind. And he even quit chess for a long period of time to focus on his classical theories from around 1872. So the games from 1872 are very important to study if you want to understand classical chess. I should also mention that he also contributed to another magazine called The Field. And this one covers the period 1873 to 1876. And the second, 1877 to 1879. You also have a third, 1880 to 1882. So these books are available if you want to study Wilhelm Steinitz more deeply. But if you only buy one book, then it's this, Modern Chess Instructor. And one can say that this book laid the foundation for Lasker's Emanuel of Chess. In the foreword written by Anders Soltis, he mentions this, and he also calls his book with the abbreviation MCI. I have especially studied part 1 in this book. So it begins with a foreword by Anders Soltis, where he put this book in a more modern context. And I should mention that Steinitz himself called his new ideas, and his new ideas was mainly, as he writes in this book, as also Soltis mentions in his foreword, that the focus is not the king. So he starts a scientific tendency in chess, what we now call the classical school, as a reaction to the romantic school. So he had many clashes, for example, with Blackburn, Winawer, who didn't believe in his theories, Chigorin. Yeah, so it was surprising that he lost to Lasker, but Lasker had learned from Steinitz and could beat him with his own means. After the foreword by Anders Soltis, there is a preface by Wilhelm Steinitz. And chapter 1, description of the game, the board and chessmen, movement of the pieces, and mode of capture. Chapter 2, algebraic notation. Chapter 3, the laws of the game. Chapter 4, technical terms. These 4 chapters might seem a little bit boring, a little bit technical, but I have read it through very carefully, and I think it's very interesting even to compare the rules from this time with present day's rules, because they were slightly different, and sometimes you laugh when you read their rules For example, it can be about cigarettes and so on and so forth. Things we take for granted today, they try to formulate in rules, because many of our rules are already understood silently, so to speak. But in those days, they were very clear about things we nowadays take for granted. The book starts to become really interesting, beginning with chapter 5, Chess as a Training of Mind and How to Improve. And what I like with this chapter is how they stresses the fact that chess is a very healthy game, because according to scientists during this time, and whom Steinitz is mentioned, you get a longer life by playing chess. And it's also a very noble game. So he writes good things about chess. Chapter 6, the modern school and its tendency. And of course, this is an important chapter because we are interested in how Steinitz started this development of his, what he called the modern school and its tendency. But we would call it classical school today. And here he mentions that the original position is in a static equilibrium. But what I'm highlighting, you can see what I have highlighted here, is how he talks about weaknesses. And this is one of the most, if not the most important element, origin with Steinitz. The mere weakness of any square on any part of the board will cause great inconvenience and trouble, and very often will be fatal. On the next page, I have also highlighted the following about weaknesses. Such weak squares are also dangerous in the ending after the exchange of queens and rooks, and when the kings are brought into play, for it is then usually important to gain moves with the pawns, and the side that is free from weak points will have a great advantage for that purpose. I think this is very insightfully written. It hints to the fact that weaknesses are more dangerous to have with only minor pieces on the board. Chapter 7, relative value of pieces and principles of play. This is also a very useful chapter to read. For example, the bishop. The great power of the bishop, especially in conjunction with the other bishop for attack in all directions, as well as for the defense, has been first systematically and consistently demonstrated in practice over the board by the great German master Louis Paulson, who may be regarded in many respects as one of the chief pioneers of the modern school. And this is what I really like with Steinitz, that he gives credits to other players, because I think even Kutov and many other players and theorists have said that the first player who really stressed that the bishop here can be an element was Wilhelm Steinitz. But Wilhelm Steinitz says himself it was not himself, it was Paulsen. And this has also been written in another book. But when you see it written by Steinitz, you really feel that it's important for him to give credit. And this is a problem we have nowadays. So he also talks about the other pieces, the knight, the pawn, yeah, obviously the rook, the queen, the king. And we all know that for Steinitz, king activity could even appear in the opening. So the next part of the book analyzes of openings, and he discusses first the Roy Lopez, and then he follows up with illustrative games, and I like this structure of the book. Of course, many of his variations are not regarded as strong today as during his time, but it's still my recommendation that you read about what he's writing regarding the ideas and the history of the opening. And of course, you must be more critical when he's dealing with concrete variations. But I can certainly also recommend the illustrative games as they are annotated by Steinitz. First of all, he was very good with his pen, and secondly, he was a very strong player who tries to develop chess. Next chapter in the analysis of openings, double Roy Lopez, 3 and 4 knights game, and this is a funny name to say, double Roy Lopez, because white plays bishop b5, but also black plays bishop b4. And then he continues with illustrated games. And next opening is the Scotch Gambit, illustrative games. The Two Knights Defense, illustrative games. Petrov's Defense, illustrative games. Philidor's Defense, illustrative games. And a pearl in this book is the contest between Steinitz and Chigorin. So all the games of the contest is included here. And all games are obviously annotated by Steinitz, so only to have access to these games annotated by Steinitz makes it worth pursuing this book. Now we come to part 2 of the book, and I find part 2 particularly interesting because he has written, for example, the following. One of the principles laid down in part 1 of this book is that the bishop is stronger than the knight. And this is very interesting because he is correct. This is even confirmed by modern computers today, that the bishop is slightly stronger than the knight. From this, I deduced that pinning a knight early in the game ought to be disadvantageous, as it must lead to a loss of a move or of value in exchange. This is very insightfully said. So what he means is that he's even critical to an opening like the Roy Lopez despite the fact he played it himself. He's writing this in this book. Because if you play bishop b5, you are losing a move. Because according to Steinitz, it's never wise intention to capture the knight on c6. Because if he captures the knight on c6, he's actually exchanging a piece that is minimally stronger than a knight. So in principle, it's wrong to pin knights, and this is what I really like. It means that a very good opening like the Nimsi Indian defense, an opening I never heard anything bad about, one of the best openings to play in chess, you have to question it if you have this perspective. So in this way, his words are timeless, because we have to always think about this fact. If the bishop is stronger than the knight, whether we should exchange a knight or even pin a knight. So this can change our view of how chess should be played, especially how we should play with bishops. So in a more modern context, well, we also have Stanton. For example, if Stanton plays b3 and bishop b2, and then follows it up with bishop takes f6, as it did in one game, and has also been played by Karpov versus Brown, then you start to think that they are breaking two classical rules. First, the fianchetto, which is a hyper-modern concept. I mean, b3 is losing time. It gives black a break with a5 to a4. And you might weaken squares on a3 and c3, especially if you exchange your bishop on f6. So it makes you more conscious about moves we take for granted today, like, for example, bishop b5 after e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6. And this is a famous conflict long time ago when Roy Lopez stated that bishop b5 was better than Damiano's suggestion 3 bishop c4, leading to the Italian game. So we always have to think, even today, which move is the best. Is it to play 3 bishop b5 or 3 bishop c4? He also mentioned that the move a6 in Roy Lopez is a good move, as it, according to what we have already stated, white is practically forced to move the bishop to a4, because then the bishop loses contact with the king side. And 3a6 was a move that was recommended by Morphy. So that is also insightfully written, that when the bishop is placed on a4, it has no contact. It's more difficult to defend the king side, the white squares. He also mentions the best methods to become better in chess, which also is very similar to what we say today, that you should try to play against first-class opponents over the board, and also study well-annotated games played between masters, because that is the most effective means of improvement, according to Steinitz. So after this interesting preface by Steinitz in part 2, I shall mention that part 2 looks like this, containing the analysis of the Ponziani opening. Ponziani is 3c3, so you can understand he wants to analyze this opening, because it means he's still waiting with the bishop on f1 and wants to build up a center first, as he's not interested in pinning the knight with bishop b5. And of the Euwe piano opening with illustrated games and notes. I should also mention, when we are talking about Steinitz criticisms of pinning knights, that he did not, he said that you should always be suspicious if you play bishop b5 or bishop g5, or if black plays bishop b4 or bishop g4, and then you also have bishop takes c6, bishop takes f6, bishop takes c3, bishop takes f3. So all these decisions, you must be very careful. Is this really right? Is this not like giving up an extremely small exchange? So he's discussing the Ponziani opening, and he has illustrated games, and then the Italian game. And remember that Robert James Bobby Fischer was very fascinated by Steinitz, and I assume he has read this book, MCI, as Anders Soltis called it, Modern Chess Instructor, because Steinitz believed that in the variation in the two knights game, e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, knight f6, 4, knight g5, black plays 4, d5, 5, e takes d5, knight a5, 6, bishop b5, check, c6, 7, d takes c6, b takes c6, 8, bishop e2, h6. And here Steinitz has written that knight f3 has always been played in this position, but instead he suggested knight h3, and this also goes in hand with the idea that white does not mind bishop takes f3, 10, g takes h3, because then white has the bishop pair and is already a pawn up, so it doesn't matter. He's essentially losing a pawn on the king's side, as the g2 pawn becomes an h3 pawn. And Fischer was influenced by this variation as he played it in his own games. And Fischer is also said to have studied 1,000 games of him. So it says something about his importance. So you should study his games, and I'm especially recommending his games from 1872 and onwards. And you should have this book so you can see what was originally written about the modern school, as they call it. However, you should be aware of the fact that if you really want to assimilate Steinitz theories theoretically, Lasker's Manual of Chess and also the middlegame books by Max Euwe are more suited for studying, because Steinitz's wisdom, so to speak, are spread in different texts. So, but if you only have one book, this is part 1 and 2. And if you are really interested in studying Steinitz deeper, you should have access to the field, and especially this magazine that he was writing from. He was editing from 1895 to 1891. So this was my 24th selection of important classical middlegame books. Stay tuned to my 25th choice. See you then, and thank you for watching.